Outpost Kepler 7 was located at the very edge of human space, like a lit match in a dark room. Small, warm, surrounded by nothing but the void. Was it a military base? Not exactly. It had weapons, yes, 2 railguns on the north and south towers and a missile defense system that was 3 years obsolete, and a garrison company of 60 soldiers whose biggest weekly problem was the lack of decent coffee. But it wasn't a combat station, it was a home. 847 people lived there. Scientists, engineers, dock workers, and families. A school with 31 children between the ages of 4 and 12. A medical bay. A bakery that, by some miracle, produced real bread. And the smell of that bread in the mornings had a way of making people forget that they were drifting in the darkness at the very edge of everything humanity had ever claimed. Commander Sarah Voss had commanded the station for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days. She kept count, not because she was unhappy she wasn't, but because she believed a person should know exactly where they stood in time. She was 44. She was lean, with gray beginning to streak her hair, which she didn't bother to hide. Before Kepler 7, she had participated in 2 border conflicts. She had seen what war looked like up close, and over the years of service, she had decided that the best thing a soldier could do was to ensure that war remained as far away as possible from those who never asked for it. That morning, she was reviewing water recycler reports when the proximity alarm triggered. At first, she wasn't alarmed. The signal had gone off 6 times in the last year. 3 times it was debris. Once it was the faint signature of a Halvari merchant with a broken transponder. Once nothing at all, a sensor ghost, a system glitch. Once it was wreckage from a research module that had gone off course. She set down her coffee and walked to the command center. Lieutenant Osi was already there. His hands glided over the console. He was 27, an academy graduate with a focused expression that made him look older than his years. He didn't look up when she entered. "How many contacts?" she asked. "I'm still counting," he said. That was the first thing that made her stomach tighten. "When it was debris, you didn't have to count." "Estimate," she said. Then he looked up. His face was very calm. Over 100, maybe closer to 200. She stood beside him and looked at the screen. They were dropping out of fold space one by one, then in groups, falling back into normal space like stones dropping through water, dark shapes, long and angular. Nothing like the rounded hulls of human ships or the curved, organic lines of the War or Vet vessels. These ships were built like weapons, designed by a mind that saw no difference between a tool and a threat. "Bret's," Voss said, recognizing the VTH ships. Once, at a diplomatic summit 7 years ago, she had stood on a platform beside a Bret ambassador and shook what passed for his hand, a hard, chitinous thing with many joints, and thought, these are not people who negotiate from a position of weakness. The Brets were old, in a way that made humans seem young and inexperienced. They had ruled 4 star systems before humanity had even fired a shot. They looked at human expansion the way a man looks at a weed growing through his patio, with a slight irritation that was beginning to grow into something more serious. There had been incidents, small ones. A human mining platform in the Cal Nebula had vanished 8 months ago. A Bret patrol had crossed into declared human space and, upon being met, had simply turned around without a single word. Diplomatic channels were tense, but war, nobody said that word out loud. Nobody believed in it. 212 ships, Osi said. The final count was done. Kepler 7 had 60 soldiers and 2 railguns. "Open a channel," Voss said. Osi opened it. She stood before the comms panel and spoke clearly. "Bret Fleet, this is Commander Sarah Voss of the human outpost, Kepler 7. You are in declared human space. Please identify your intentions." She paused. "We are a civilian station. We are not a military target." Silence. She tried again in the standard galactic common, the trade language shared by all spacefaring civilizations. Her accent wasn't perfect, but the words were clear. More silence. The Bret fleet continued to approach. She had about 4 minutes before they were within weapons range. She spent the first minute on 2 more connection attempts. The second minute was spent calculating what 200 ships could do to a station built for science, life, and baking bread. The third minute was spent ensuring the children in the school were moved to the station's inner core, into the blast-hardened technical tunnels where the water purifiers hummed. The fourth minute was spent sending an emergency beacon, a non-standard emergency beacon. In the Kepler 7 system, there were 2 emergency communication protocols. One was yellow, a general emergency. Help needed. Something went wrong. The other was red. The red beacon had a different name in the official manual, but everyone who worked at the frontier stations knew what it was really called. It was called the last word. The last word transmitted everything. All sensor data, all ship counts, all approach vectors, all identifications. It transmitted in real time everything that was happening, and it sent this feedback to Earth Command on a narrowband signal that nothing could jam, because it used 17 redundant frequencies simultaneously. It didn't ask for help. It didn't plead. It simply said, "Here is what is happening to your people right now." It was designed with the understanding that sometimes stations didn't survive long enough for help to arrive, and the people who built it decided that in such cases, the least they could do was ensure that someone knew. Voss pressed the red button. Then, the Brets opened fire. Private Marcus Chen had been in the army for 14 months. He was 22. He grew up in a city called Chandu, where it was hot in the summer and his grandmother taught him to make dumplings, and he wanted to become a civil engineer before he saw a recruitment poster at the railway station and thought for reasons he couldn't explain later, yes. He was at his post on the southern rail battery when the first volley hit the station's outer shields. The entire platform shuddered. He grabbed the handrail with both hands and looked through the armored porthole and saw the light, not sunlight, not starlight fire, energy pulses, thick and blue-white, coming from all sides, as if they had always been there and the universe was just waiting to show him. His headset cracked. Sergeant Darvangi's voice. "Southern Battery, target the lead ship, fire at will." He fired. The railgun recoiled. The tungsten slug, the size of his forearm, left the barrel at a speed that momentarily distorted the air around it, shimmering briefly. It crossed the distance to the lead Bret ship in a fraction of a second. He saw the impact a small streak of debris and venting atmosphere on the Bret ship's port side. A scratch. He fired again and again. The station was being picked apart. The Brets didn't fight like humans. Human warships moved, danced, repositioned. They used speed and angles. The Bret fleet simply moved in a wall line. The front ships took the fire, held their positions, and returned fire, and the ships behind them moved up to fill any gaps. It wasn't combat tactics. It was geometry. Geometry of what? Of something that had decided that the other had to cease existing. The outer residential ring took a hit that sent 2 sections flying into space. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut. The medical bay lost power and switched to reserve. One of the command towers broke and tumbled, spinning slowly in the darkness. Chen kept firing. His hands were steady. He was surprised by this. Before, he had thought that when the moment came, his hands would shake. They didn't shake. They just did what he had been trained to do. And a quiet part of his brain watched this with something that wasn't quite pride, not quite grief, and not quite what? The thing for which he had no word. The northern rail battery went offline. He heard it a different kind of silence over the general comms line where Corporal Kim had been calling out targets. Then, nothing. He was the last gunner. Commander Voss's voice came over the station-wide channel. She didn't shout. She spoke as she always did, clear and direct, as if she were giving a weather report. "To all personnel," Commander Voss said, "the station will not hold. I order all non-combat personnel to proceed to the escape pods. Soldiers at your posts. You have done everything you could. I am proud of every one of you." A pause. "This is not the end. This is a message, and it has been sent." Chen heard her say it and immediately understood that she meant the last word, already flying home. He fired the southern railgun 3 more times before a Bret energy pulse disabled the battery's power coupling and the gun locked in his hands. He sat there for a minute in the dark, in the silence, no longer able to fire. Through the porthole, he saw the Bret ships approaching, massive, filling the space where the stars had been. He picked up his personal rifle. He went to find the others. The escape pods launched, 41 of them, carrying the people who had managed to reach the launch bays in time. Children, scientists, the baker clutching a sack of flour for a reason she wouldn't be able to explain later but which made sense to her at the time. Some soldiers, not all. 41 pods, spinning away from the station in all directions, little white seeds cast into the darkness. The Brets didn't fire on the pods. This was noted afterward by everyone who studied what happened at Kepler 7. The Brets didn't kill the people in the pods. They let them go. This was interpreted in different ways by different people. Some said it meant the Brets had limits. Others said it was done to send a signal, so there would be witnesses. Others simply said the pods were too small to bother with. Voss was not in a pod. She remained on the command deck until the Bret boarding parties cut through the airlock. She was still transmitting on the last word frequency, describing everything she saw. Calm and precise Bret boarding squads are entering the station. They are armed with short-range energy weapons. They are operating in groups of 6. They do not seem to be taking prisoners. She paused. The sounds of boarding grew louder. They seem to be looking for something. I don't know what. Another pause. Kepler 7 to Earth Command. We are destroyed. Her voice hadn't changed. My name is Commander Sarah Voss. I am 44 years old. This station was not a military target. Remember this. Remember us. The signal continued to transmit for another 11 seconds, then it cut off. 7 light-years away, a receiving station on the moon of a gas giant called Petra's World sat in the cold and dark and caught the signal with a dish the size of a football field. The automated system tagged it, assigned it high priority, and sent it on via a narrowband relay that reached Earth in less than 9 hours. On Earth, in a building in New Geneva with no outside windows and a name that wasn't in any public registry, a man named Director Henrik Solberg was woken at 2 a.m. He sat on the edge of his bed in the dark, then dressed, then walked down a long corridor into a room with 1 table and 1 screen. He read the report. He reviewed the sensor data. He saw the 212 ships. He saw the weapons. He sat with it for a long time. Then he picked up a phone that had only 1 number programmed into it. A phone that hadn't been used in his 17 years in this position. He dialed once. A voice answered. He said nothing. He just waited. Director Solberg said 4 words. Activate Protocol Omega. The voice on the other end said, Confirmed. Activation time, 2 GMT. Logging. Somewhere, in a facility that was on no map, lights began to turn on. Immediately, and all at once. The facility had no name in any official registry. It was located on a moon called Dura, orbiting a gas giant in a system 3 jumps from Earth. The system had no habitable planets, no resources worth mining. There was no reason for anyone to be there. This, of course, was exactly why it was chosen. Outside, Dura looked like any other airless rock in the galaxy. Gray, crater-pitted, and dead, with a thin, dusty haze that never settled. If you flew past, your sensors would show nothing interesting, which was also by design. The sensor cloaking system buried beneath the surface cost more than the GDP of several small countries and worked perfectly. Inside, Dura was the most dangerous place in the known galaxy. When the 4 words were spoken, when Director Solberg said, Activate Protocol Omega into that phone, all the lights in the room came on at once, and every person working there stopped whatever they were doing and stood very still for exactly 1 second. Not because they were ordered to, but because they all understood in one moment what the words meant. They had been preparing for this. They had spent years preparing for this. Some of them had spent their entire careers here, waiting for a signal they had personally hoped would never arrive. Now it had. And for 1 second they froze. Then they moved. Admiral James Harlow was 59 years old and had commanded the Omega Fleet for 6 years. Before that, he had commanded a carrier group in the Cal conflict. He had participated in 2 battles that were described in history textbooks as decisive and which he described as expensive. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face that looked like it had been carved by someone who valued function more than beauty. His officers said he had 2 facial expressions, thinking and decided, and they were right. He was in the facility's command center when the activation signal arrived, already awake, already dressed, because the preliminary sensor data from the Petra's World relay had reached him 40 minutes earlier, and reading them, he knew what was coming. He hadn't slept. He sat in the command center, drank black coffee, watched the numbers, and waited. When the confirmation came, he set down his coffee. All hands to board, he said. His voice was effortless. It was the type of voice that had given orders in noisy rooms for 30 years. Protocol Omega confirmed as active. This is not a drill. Initiate pre-start sequence for all bays. I want full drive diagnostics completed in 40 minutes. Navigation. Set target coordinates. Weapons. Take your stations. Nobody applauded. Nobody spoke except to confirm orders. The room filled with the sounds of keyboards, footsteps, and the low hum of waking systems that had never been used outside of tests. Harlow walked to the main porthole. Outside, in the caves hollowed into the rock of Dura, after 17 years of construction, the Omega fleet stood in rows. 53 warships, not the largest ships in the human fleet, that wasn't the point. These were not carriers, not support ships, Not the ships built for holding territory. These were built for one thing only. Each was covered in an alloy hull that existed in no published registry of materials. Each carried weapon systems that didn't exist in any arms treaty because humanity had never told anyone they existed. Each had a fold drive capable of crossing 12 light-years in a single jump, which was significantly faster than anything else ever built by other species. The galaxy knew that humans were fast. They didn't know how fast. That was intentional. Harla looked at his fleet. He thought about the woman from the recording. The last word. Her voice had been calm while her station was being torn apart around her. He thought about the children who were in the school. He felt no anger. He was past the age where anger was useful to him. Instead, he felt a cold, settled feeling, a weight that had found its proper place in his chest. He turned back to the room. 40 minutes, he said again, not 41. The Bret commander who had ordered the attack on Kepler 7 bore the name Ketwash. He was young by Bret standards, barely 200 years old, and ambitious in the way young Bret commanders sometimes were. 3 months ago, he had presented the case for attacking Kepler 7 to the Bret High Council with diagrams and projections, and with such thorough language that the violence sounded like reasonableness. The argument was simple. Human expansion had reached the edge of the Bret's third territorial zone. If it continued at the current rate, in 40 years, humans would be inside Bret space. It was better to establish a border now. Better to demonstrate clearly and early that there were places where humans did not go. A single strike on a small outpost, yes, civilian, but that was part of the design. It would send a signal that no diplomatic channel could match. The High Council approved it. Now, Ketwash stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched as his crews finished working on the debris of Kepler 7. He wasn't a cruel commander. The pods were allowed to be released. There would be survivors. That, too, was part of the message. You needed living mouths to carry the words back. His communications officer brought him the standard post-action report. 212 ships deployed. 0 Bret casualties. Outpost destroyed. He himself composed the message for Earth Command. It was precise and formal, as diplomatic correspondence required. It stated, in Galactic Common, that the Bret Dominion considered the Kepler 7 sector matter closed, that human expansion into Zone 3 would be viewed as an act of aggression, and that the Bret Dominion hoped this demonstration of intent would allow both species to move forward in a spirit of mutual understanding. He was quite pleased with the wording mutual understanding. It implied equality. It wasn't ungrateful. He sent the message, then waited for a response from the humans. He expected something formal, perhaps angry, definitely weak. Humans weren't a warlike race, not quite. They expanded, built, traded. They had never fought a war on the scale that the Brets had in their early centuries. The Cal conflict was minor. Border skirmishes were minor. Humans could fight, yes, but they didn't like it. They didn't build entire philosophies around it. When pressed, they negotiated. He was very sure they would negotiate. The response that came from Earth Command was not what he expected. It wasn't angry. It wasn't a list of demands. It wasn't a request for negotiations. It was 8 words. You have 48 hours to evacuate your home world. That was all. Ketwash read it twice, then read it a third time in case he had missed something. He hadn't missed anything. 8 words. No signature, no diplomatic title. Just a message on official Earth Command frequencies, time-stamped and confirmed. He stared at it for a long time, then laughed. It was a sharp, clicking sound, the equivalent of laughter for the Brets, and his bridge crew heard it and relaxed, because if the commander was laughing, the humans had clearly said something funny. "Evacuate our home world," he said, speaking it aloud so everyone could hear and appreciate. "They want us to evacuate our home world." The Bret Dominion's home world was called Viticor. It was the 3rd planet of a yellow star in a system the Brets had occupied for over 4,000 years. Its orbital defense systems alone were enough to stop a human carrier group. Its planetary shield grid had been built and upgraded for 3 centuries. Viticor hadn't been successfully attacked in 2,000 years of Bret history. The idea that humanity with their small outposts, their fold drives, and their bakeries could threaten Viticor was not just unlikely. It was ridiculous. Ketwash sent his reply, also brief. "Come then." Ketwash did not know, and almost no one outside of human military command knew, what humanity had been building for the last 17 years. It all started after the Cal conflict. A quiet study conducted by a woman named Admiral Eva Marsh, who had since retired and moved to live on a farm in New Zealand, asked one question: If a species with significantly greater military power than anything humanity has faced so far decides to destroy human civilization, what will we do? The answer before the study was, not much. Admiral Marsh found this unacceptable. She didn't present her findings to the public. She presented them in a room with no recording devices to the Secretary of Defense and 2 members of the Oversight Committee. What she told them was simple. Humanity was expanding. Expansion generated contact. Contact in history didn't always go smoothly. And humanity, by the standards of the species it encountered, was young, inexperienced, vulnerable as they didn't yet fully understand. She proposed something that had no public name, but inside was called the doctrine of certainty. The logic was old as human warfare. It was the logic of nuclear deterrence applied to space. You don't build weapons to use them. You build them so that their use is never necessary. You build it. Never tell anyone you have it. You maintain it and hope with all your heart that it will gather dust forever. But you build it powerful. You build it so that if the day comes, there is no hesitation, no long war, no chance for the species to calculate that it can withstand a human response and come out ahead. You build it so that the response is final, and you build it fast. Because if you are going to act as a deterrent, the response must arrive before the attacker can adapt, before he can evacuate his troops, before he can disperse his command structure. The response must arrive, and it must be decisive. And it must happen so fast that the galaxy realizes in one clear and terrible moment that attacking humanity is not a gamble, it is the end. 47 minutes after Director Solberg's call, Admiral Harla boarded his flagship, the HMS Reckoning, which had never before left the Dura facility, and gave the order to launch. 53 ships rose from the rock caves into space. No training formations, no ceremony. They simply rose, oriented themselves, and their fold drives began to spool, and the space around each ship began to do what fold drives do, a slight distortion, a flickering of light like heat haze over summer asphalt, only cold. On Dura, the lights returned to normal mode. The technicians left behind sat at their stations and watched the fleet depart. Some of them had worked at this facility for 10 years and had never seen all 53 ships move at once. Some of them cried, some were very quiet. All of them understood what they were seeing. They were seeing the answer. Across the galaxy, other species noticed the strangeness. The Halvari Trade Consortium had observation posts in 17 systems along the human border. Their systems noted unusual fold drive signatures originating from a system that was supposed to be empty. A Halvari analyst named Shred filed an alarm that moved up her chain of command at the speed unusual things moved in bureaucracy, that is, slowly, until it reached someone senior enough to understand what they were looking at, and then very quickly. The Vet Explorer Guild, which had 7 observation platforms in the outer sectors, recorded an energy spike from 53 simultaneous spooling fold drives and sent it to their science directorate with the note, "We have never seen a human fleet of this size before." Monitors of open channels for the Galactic Assembly, tracking major military movements under the Interspecies Non-Escalation Treaty, recorded the departure signature, and automatically generated a request to human diplomatic channels. The request concerned the nature and destination of the... In her response, she referenced Article 9, Subsection 4, Paragraph 2 of the treaty. The paragraph consisted of only 3 sentences. It had been included in the treaty at humanity's insistence 17 years ago during the preparatory meetings. Most other species at the table had barely paid attention to it. It stated, "In the case of an unprovoked armed attack on a human civilian institution that results in loss of human life, the government of humanity reserves the right to apply proportional and necessary force without prior notification of the Assembly. The nature and scale of such force are determined solely by the military command of humanity. This provision supersedes all requirements for notification and approval." Most members of the Assembly who read this response had to search for the paragraph. They had forgotten it was there. Upon finding it and reading it, the room became very quiet. Ambassador Dean Saul, a Halvari who had served in the diplomatic corps for 40 years and was known for never losing his composure, read the paragraph 3 times. Then he gathered everything he had on human military capabilities. Then he loaded the sensor data from his observation post. 53 ships, all in motion, all moving toward Bret space. He sent an urgent message to Ketwash, marked with maximum priority. "Respond to the human ultimatum. Do it now. Do not wait." The message arrived on Ketwash's flagship 4 minutes after the Omega fleet exited fold space in the Dura system. It arrived too late. In the deep darkness of space, the 53 ships bent the light around themselves and vanished. The escape pod was 4 meters long and smelled of recycled air and fear. Private Marcus Chen sat with his back against the curved wall, knees pulled to his chest, and counted the people around him. 11. 3 soldiers, including Sergeant Darvangi, who had a burn along her left forearm from the battery fire and had wrapped it with a strip torn from her undershirt. 5 civilians, 2 engineers, a lab technician, a woman named Hessa who managed the station's commissary, and a man whose name Chen didn't know but who was one of the dock workers, and 3 children, a boy of about 8 and 2, girls of about 6 and 10, who had been in school when the attack started. They had no parents. Hessa held the youngest girl and spoke to her quietly, and the girl didn't cry, but her eyes were very large and she hadn't blinked in a long time. The pod had no engine other than the initial ejection impulse. It drifted. The beacon transmitted a low automatic pulse on the standard rescue frequency, and there was nothing to do but wait and hope someone would pick it up before the air scrubbers finished their cycle, which, as the pod's little display showed, would happen in about 61 hours. He calculated twice and got the same result, and decided that a third calculation wouldn't improve the situation. Sergeant Darvangi stood by the tiny porthole looking out. She stood there for a long time. "What do you see?" Chen asked. "Debris," she replied. "Some of it is ours." She paused. "The Bret ships are still there, most of them. Some are moving around the debris, looking for something, maybe." She didn't move from the porthole and she didn't brag. Chen thought about Commander Voss. He thought about the last word transmission, parts of which he had heard in his headset before the battery died. He thought about her voice, her composure. He had met officers who portrayed composure, wore it like a uniform in front of soldiers because they knew it was required. Voss wasn't portraying. Her voice sounded like that of a person who had come to terms with something and was simply performing the last tasks available to her. He thought about the 8 words that Earth Command would receive. The ultimatum of 48 hours. He had heard about the Omega Protocol. Everyone in the Frontier Service had heard about it, the same way they heard about things that weren't officially confirmed fragments, whispers, the careful phrasing of senior officers who neither confirmed nor denied. He had never been sure if it was real, or if it was one of those stories soldiers told each other to feel better while standing in the dark at the edge of everything. He was starting to think it was real. He looked at the 3 children. The 8-year-old boy had fallen asleep leaning against the wall, which was either a gift or a sign that his body had simply shut down the part that could process what was happening. The older girl was looking at Chen with her dark, calm eyes. She looked as though she were waiting for him to tell her something true. He tried to think of something true that would also be comforting. "Help is coming," he said. She met his gaze for a moment. "How do you know?" "Because we sent a signal," he said, "and we don't leave people behind." She thought about it, then leaned her head against the wall and closed her eyes. Not because she believed him, Chen thought, but because she decided to act as if she believed, which was a different thing and in some way braver. On VT Core, the homeworld of the Bret Dominion, life went on as always. The planet was old, as only homeworlds of ancient species can be old, layered and dense with history. Every city was built on top of the bones of older cities. Every mountain range was crossed by roads that had been walked for thousands of years. The atmosphere was thick and warm and had the specific golden color under which Bret biology had evolved. The cities were beautiful in their own way, towering, sharp-edged, and precise, built without curves because Bret architecture had never valued softness. The population was about 4 billion. They worked, they raised offspring, they argued about politics, remembered ancestors, and made plans for the future in the casual manner that people do when there is no reason to believe the future will be any different from the present. The planetary defense grid floated in orbit above them. 17 shield satellites in a synchronous ring, 42 gun platforms, 4 permanent defense stations. Each was larger than Kepler 7. Each was built for war, not for science, bread, or children. The grid had existed for 300 years. During that time, it had been tested in real combat twice in conflicts that were now so distant that they were considered ancient history. It had never failed. The inhabitants of VT Core didn't know about the attack on Kepler 7 inches detail. The Bret Dominion didn't have a free press in the sense that some species did. Information moved through official channels, shaped by official hands. What people knew was that an operation had been carried out at the border, that it was successful, and that the Dominion was safe. They lived their lives. In the hall of the Galactic Assembly, nobody was living their lives. The assembly met on a station called Concord, located in neutral space between three major territorial borders. The hall was built to accommodate representatives of 41 species and was designed with the understanding that these species varied significantly in size, atmospheric preferences, and sensory capabilities. The result was a room that always looked a bit chaotic. Different atmospheric sections, different lighting zones, background translation systems constantly running. Today, the chaos wasn't architectural. Ambassador Dean Saul of the Halvery Consortium stood at the central podium. He was a large creature, about a head taller than most humans, with pale gray skin and wide-set eyes characteristic of his species. He was known for his composure, his measured words, and for never making a claim he couldn't back with evidence. Today, he was not composed. "I want every representative in this room to understand what we are looking at," he said. His translation was broadcast in 37 languages simultaneously, each carrying his exact tone. "This is not a human patrol. This is not a response force. This is a fleet of 53 warships with class and capabilities that do not exist in any external intelligence service, including my own, which is one of the best in this assembly. They appeared from a system we consider uninhabitable. Their fold drive signatures indicate range and speed exceeding what we consider the upper limit of human motion technology." He paused and let it sink in. "The government of humanity has applied Article 9, subsection 4. They are not required to tell us their destination, and they have not. However, given the timing and recent events at Kepler 7, I think we all understand where this fleet is heading." The hall was very quiet. 41 species, and not one of them spoke. The representative of the Vet Guild, a small four-legged creature, very still as vets freeze when they think hard, raised a communication flag. "What is the expected arrival time?" Dean Saul looked at his data. Based on the fold drive signatures and the distance to the Bret home system, he stopped. He looked at the number again because the first time he looked at it, he thought, "Must have made a mistake." There was no mistake. Based on these figures, the fleet Snorts will arrive in the Bret home system in approximately 3 hours. More silence. "3 hours," said the vet representative in a tone that wasn't a question. Rather, as if someone were reading a word in a language he didn't know and wasn't sure he had read correctly. "3 hours," confirmed Dean Saul, and the hall filled with sounds. On the bridge of the HMS Reckoning, fold space looked as it always did, like nothing, like an absence of everything, like the universe holding its breath. The porthole showed an endless silver gray that tired the eyes if you looked at it for too long. Most experienced officers didn't look at it at all. In fold space, there was nothing to see. You were between places, between moments, and the best thing to do was focus on where you were headed. Admiral Harla reviewed the data of the VTS core system for the 9th time. By now, he knew the orbital defense grid by heart. He knew the location of all 17 shield satellites, all 42 gun platforms, and the 4 defense stations. He knew the estimated response time of the Bret fleet ships that would be launched from the home space docks the moment the Omega fleet exited fold space. He knew the geography of the fight. He also knew something the Brets didn't. 12 years ago, a deeply embedded Bret intelligence agent had obtained the full technical specifications of the Bret planetary shield grid. Not external interface data, not public design documents, but actual engineering files, maintenance logs, test results. Every system had weaknesses. The Bret shield grid had 3 specific ones, identified by human engineers who had spent years doing nothing but looking for them. Harla knew exactly where to press. He thought about the 4 8-hour ultimatum. He had written it himself, actually. Or rather, he had approved the final wording, which was drafted by a 3-person team in the room down the hall from his office. The number 48 was chosen intentionally long enough that the Brets wouldn't believe it was real, but not so long that it could be mistaken for indecision. He didn't expect the Brets to evacuate. He gave the ultimatum because it was the right thing to do. Because he wasn't a person who believed in killing people who didn't need to die. On VT Core lived 4 billion people. They hadn't ordered the attack on Kepler 7. They hadn't voted for Ketwash. They had just woken up that morning on a planet where they had always lived. He gave them 48 hours. What they did with those 48 hours was their choice. He looked at the fold space in the porthole and thought about Sarah Voss. He had thought about her since he first heard the recording of the last word. He had never met her. She was a commander of a border station, not the type of officer whose path crossed with fleet admirals very often. But he had heard her voice, clear and composed at the end, and knew what kind of soldier she was. He thought, she sent a message. I am the answer. 30 minutes to drop point, reported navigation. All stations, confirm readiness, Harla said. Confirmations came one after another. 53 ships, all ready, all built for exactly this. Ketwash received the assembly alert and the Halvari ambassador's message in a 1 to 2 minute window. He read both. He read them standing on his bridge very quietly, with the peculiar composure of a person whose certainty had just collided with something it wasn't prepared for. 53 ships, 3 hours. A class of ship no one had on record. He called his chief tactical officer. What do we know about this fleet? Nothing confirmed, the officer replied. Fold drive signatures are beyond anything in our database, their drive capability. He stopped. He made a clicking sound that meant he was recalculating. Their drive capability significantly exceeds what our intelligence estimated for human movement. Ketwash went silent. Yes, Commander, his officer said carefully. Should we initiate an alert for the System Defense Command Center? Send the alert, Ketwash said. He said it in a voice that was very controlled, because he was a Bret commander and control was expected. Tell them a human fleet is approaching. Tell them to turn on the full grid. He didn't say what he was thinking. He was thinking that he had sent humanity a message. Come then. And they had come. They had come with 53 ships that didn't exist in any record. They had come in 3 hours, when 3 hours was technically impossible. They had come without a second ultimatum, without a counter-proposal, without any diplomatic maneuvering that species do when they prepare to threaten but not act. They just came. Outside the porthole, the debris of Kepler 7 still floated small pieces of metal and plastic. Things people had kept in their personal belongings were drifting and cooling. A coffee mug, scraps of a table, something that might have been a child's drawing, laminated, slowly spinning in the silence. Ketwash looked at it for the first time since the start of the operation. He felt something for which he had no exact word, not fear, not yet something quieter than fear, something that lived in the space between certainty and doubt, between what you were sure of and what you were no longer sure of. He was sure the humans wouldn't come, they were coming. He was sure they couldn't get here in 3 hours, they would be here in 3 hours. And somewhere deep in that part of him that was a military mind before anything else, a cold and honest voice said, they were ready. They were already ready. They had built something and hidden it and waited, not hoping it would never be needed. Waiting for the moment someone would give them a reason. He looked at the debris of Kepler 7 again. He had given them a reason. Deep in the darkness between the stars, 53 human ships fell out of fold space like a held breath, like the pause before a word that could not be taken back, like the last quiet moment before the arrival of the answer. They were 22 minutes from the Bret home system. The grid was powering up. It wasn't enough. They exited fold space simultaneously, not sequentially, not one after another, as most species deployed ships from fold space. Staged arrival, spread over several minutes, each ship required a moment for stabilization before the next arrived. Human fold drives were designed specifically to avoid this window of vulnerability. All 53 ships returned to normal space in a 1 to 2 second window, arriving already oriented, already at combat speed, already in formation. The Bret defense grid registered them the moment they appeared. The response was immediate. Ketwash had sent his alert early, and the Home System Defense Command had taken it seriously enough to turn on everything. Every shield satellite was at full power. All gun platforms had active targeting systems. The 4 defense stations were fully crewed and ready for battle. The grid opened fire in the first 4 seconds. What flew out of those platforms was not like what had hit Kepler 7. Kepler 7 was hit by ship-borne weapons, powerful, yes, but intended for ship-to-ship combat. VT Corps' defense grid fired planetary energy weapons, the kind of firepower intended to stop fleets, to stop invasions, so that any attacker would look at the numbers and decide the cost wasn't worth it. The volley hit the human fleet. On the Bridge of Reckoning, the impact registered as a sound before anything else, a dull, resonant boom that passed through the hull like a struck bell. Then the lights flickered once, then the shields absorbed the rest, and the instrument panel showed green across all 53 ships, and the sound faded. Admiral Harla didn't move from his command chair. Shields at 91%. His tactical officer reported. Her name was Commander Yuki Sato. And she had the precise, unhurried voice of a person who had lost this fight in simulation over 400 times. No hull damage on any ship. The grid fired again, the second volley stronger than the first. Targeting adjusted. Harla felt it differently this time. Longer pressing pressure, not a single blow, as if the universe were pressing on the fleet and asking it to move. Shields at 83%. Still green across the board, Sato said. Harla looked at the tactical display. The 17 shield satellites of the grid were arranged in a standard defensive ring around the planet. On the surface, it was a solid formation, but in this ring were 3 places where the satellite coverage overlapped at a slightly different frequency. A calibration quirk that had been present in the system since the last update cycle, documented in the maintenance logs that human intelligence had obtained 12 years ago. These 3 points weren't weak in any way known to the Brets, but they were weak in that specific sense that the Reckoning's guns were built to exploit. Navigation, Harla said. Lead us to position Alpha. All ships following. The fleet moved. It didn't charge the grid head-on. It turned. A smooth, coordinated turn. All 53 ships moved together with the precision that comes only from crews who had practiced the same maneuver until it lived in their hands, not in their heads. The fleet moved toward the first of the 3 calibration points in the satellite ring. And while moving, it continued to take fire, and its shields continued to hold. And nothing in the way Harla sat in the chair indicated the exceptional nature of it all. The first satellite was destroyed 11 minutes after the fleet's arrival. Harla's gun crews hit the calibration point with a synchronized volley from 9 ships. A combination of frequencies that the satellite's shield was not optimized to handle, delivered in a precise sequence that the Bret engineers who built the satellite never considered, because no one was supposed to know the calibration data. The satellite's shield collapsed inward. Then the satellite itself flew apart in a brief, bright burst of debris. The gap left behind in the ring was small, but it was a gap. First point open, confirmed Sato, moving to position Beta. The fleet turned again. On the Bret defense station closest to the breach, the commander was a career officer named Dath Errol, who had served in the home system defense for 30 years. She saw the satellite fall and immediately understood several things. She understood that the humans knew about the calibration point, which meant they had intelligence they shouldn't have. She understood that her grid's return fire had very little effect on the human fleet, which meant their shields operated on principles not in her threat database. She understood that the humans weren't firing at random. They were moving with purpose toward specific points, which meant they had a plan they had developed long before arriving. She sent an emergency alert to the VT Corps High Council. It said, "Grid compromised. Recommend initiating civilian defense protocols." Then she continued to fight because she was a career officer, and career officers did exactly that. The second satellite fell 14 minutes later. The third, 9 minutes. The human crews were acting faster now. Their rhythm was set, their targeting sharpened by the data of the first 2 engagements. There were 3 gaps in the ring. The defense stations began to move to cover them, firing constantly, and Reckoning took a direct hit from a station-class gun that shook the entire ship so violently that 2 crew members were thrown from their stations. "Shields at 64%, Sato said, and one of the crew members returned to his post and said, "Still here," and continued to work. "Gun platforms. Next in line. Priority order as planned," Harla said. "Destroy them." 42 gun platforms died over the next 18 minutes. They didn't die quietly. They fired until they couldn't fire anymore, and several of them dealt significant blows to the human ships. 2 ships were forced to retreat with shield failure. One had a hull breach in an outer bay that automatically sealed. One had a disabled weapons system, but they died one by one in the priority order established by Harla's planners. They died. The defense stations held on longer. They were larger, better defended, crewed by people who were very good at their jobs and fought with the specific ferocity of people defending the place where their families lived. Dath Errol's station was the last. It held on for 23 minutes after the others fell, using everything it had, throwing everything at the human ships, until its station had no weapons left. When it was over, her station was battered and drifting. Her crew was alive. The human ships didn't finish off the station. They left it drifting, disarmed, alive. This detail was noted by everyone who subsequently studied the battle. The defense grid was gone. 31 minutes after the Omega fleet appeared in the Bret home system, the planet beneath them was exposed. No shield ring, no gun platforms, no defense stations that could fight back. Just a planet. VT Corps, from orbit, looked beautiful. The golden atmosphere made it glow warmly against the dark, and the shapes of the continents were different from Earth's more angular, less curved, like the Brets themselves. But the oceans were the same blue-black as oceans everywhere, and the cloud patterns moved as cloud patterns do on every planet where there is weather. And from here, it looked like any other place that 4 billion people called home. Harla looked at it for a long time. Then he opened a channel not to the defense stations, not to Ketwash's fleet, which was still at the border with the debris of Kepler 7 and hadn't yet returned. They were hours away, and they would find an empty parking space where their home system's protection had been. Not to a military channel at all. He opened the widest civilian channel used by the Brets, the one that carried public broadcasts to every receiver on the planet. He spoke in Galactic Common, slowly and clearly. People of VT Corps, my name is Admiral James Harla of the Human Omega Fleet. 41 hours ago, your government attacked a human civilian outpost called Kepler 7. 847 people lived there. Your government sent 212 warships. There were 60 soldiers defending a station built for science and families. He paused. We gave your government 48 hours to evacuate this planet. That offer was made in the hope that your government would take it. They did not. What happens next is a consequence of what was done at Kepler 7. I am sorry for what I am about to do. I am not sorry that I am doing it. He closed the channel. Sir, said Lieutenant Commander Fenn, his communications officer. He was 26 years old, and in his voice was something that wasn't quite an argument and not quite a question, but tried to be neither. Sir, there are 4 billion people on this planet. I know, Harla said. We are the weapon. Fenn went silent. He swallowed. Sir, Harla looked at him. The weapon is aimed at the planet's core. Lieutenant Commander, the cascade will take 6 hours. 6 hours from the moment of firing. He let that sink in. The Bret Dominion has emergency evacuation ships capable of carrying 200 people per hour. In 6 hours, they can move a minimum of 1 to 2 billion people to an outer system. If they start now, he turned to the display. We gave them 48 hours, and they decided not to use them. I am giving the planet 6 more. The moment the weapon fires, a 6-hour countdown begins. What they do with those 6 hours, their choice. Fenn was silent. I need you at your post, Harla said. Not because I order it, but because I need you. Fenn sat back down. Throughout the fleet, a signal went out. A single code transmission from Reckoning to 50 other ships. The signal contained 2 words. Weapons ready. On each of the 12 designated ships, 12 of the 53 built for this specific purpose, a system that had never been used outside of tests, began its initialization sequence. The weapon wasn't a missile. It wasn't a beam. It was a gravitational resonance emitter, a device that, when aimed at a planet's core, triggered a cascading reaction in the planet's internal structure, a reaction that grew like fire with enough fuel until the core couldn't maintain its shape. It wasn't a clean death of a world. Nothing about this was clean, but it was designed to give time. The cascade was slow enough that the people on the surface would feel the start of earthquakes, see the readings on their instruments, understand what was happening, and have hours to run. It wasn't exactly mercy. It was the minimum a person like Harla could offer and still sleep. Inwardly, he thought about Commander Voss. He thought about the 31 children in the school at the edge of everything. He thought about the 8 words he had sent to Ketwash. You have 48 hours to evacuate your home world. And Ketwash had replied with 2 words, Come then. Come then. Harla had come. Weapon, he said. His voice was the same as always. Confirm targeting. Commander Sato performed the confirmation check. Targeting confirmed. Core resonance lock set on all 12 emitters. Firing solution is clear. On my command, Harla said. Outside the porthole, Vikor glowed gold in the dark. Beautiful, old, and full of people who were not soldiers. Most of them hadn't given the order to attack Kepler 7. They hadn't voted for Ketwash. They just lived there because it was the place where they had always lived. I wish you would leave, he said. The 12 guns fired simultaneously. There was no visible beam, no dramatic light show. The emitter simply activated, and somewhere deep below the surface of Vetkor, in the iron silicon heart of the planet, something started, something that would not stop. The clock began counting 6 hours. Harla didn't take his eyes off the planet. All ships, he said. Start recording. Every ship keeps full sensor logs from this moment forward. He paused. The galaxy needs to see what this costs. Both sides. The fleet recorded. Below them, VT Corps began to tremble. The earthquakes started small. The residents of VT-Core felt them, as people feel the first signs of something wrong. Vibration in the floor, rattling in the walls, a sound that was too low to hear but could be felt in the chest. In the cities, instruments immediately registered fluctuations in the core. The science directorate sent an alert to the government within minutes. The government, which had just received the emergency message from Dath Errol regarding the defense station, was already in an emergency session. They knew what this was. They had been told. Harla had broadcast on the civilian channel in clear galactic common. And even if they hadn't heard his words, the readings told the same story. The cascade was building. The core temperature was rising in a pattern that couldn't arise naturally. Whether the humans fired or not, it had found what it was looking for, and it wasn't stopping. 6 hours. The government activated the emergency evacuation fleet. Ships that weren't intended for this, cargo carriers, passenger liners, government transports, military supply ships, were redirected, loaded, and launched. Spaceports turned into something that was difficult to describe and even harder to watch. 4 billion people, and the ships could carry only a fraction of them. Parents made decisions that no parent should have to make. They sent the young first, then the old. Order broke down within the first hour and turned simply into, whoever can get to a ship, get on the ship. The VTH were not a species prone to public displays of emotion. Their culture valued restraint, dignity, enduring hardships without open grief. But the VetCore spaceports that day didn't know this restraint. And the surviving records show what looks the same for every species, in every language, on every planet, people holding on to each other in the last moments before parting, unwilling to let go. The evacuation ships rose in streams. Thousands of them, ships that couldn't fold, that could reach only the outer system, filled their holds, launched, and turned away from the planet that was shaking beneath them. In 6 hours, they carried 412 million people. 3,588,000,000 didn't manage to leave the planet. Harla watched the evacuation from the bridge of the reckoning. He looked at every rising ship. He counted them just as Voss had counted the days of her command. Not because it changed anything, but because he believed a person should know exactly what they were responsible for. He watched the streams of ships rising from the surface, and tracked the readings showing the deepening of the cascade, the rising core temperature, the spread of seismic activity from the equatorial regions outward. At the 4-hour stage, the surface began to show visible changes. The golden atmosphere thickened. Eruptions opened along the 3 main faults simultaneously. At first, slowly, then not. The oceans in the equatorial region began to behave strangely. Tidal patterns disturbed. Temperatures rising. Deep water began to behave the way deep water behaves when the heat from below becomes wrong. At the 5-hour stage, Commander Sato lowered her tablet and didn't lift it again. Lieutenant Commander Fenn hadn't spoken for 2 hours. It was very quiet on the bridge, except for the automated systems and the low sound of the logs running on every ship. At 5:41, the cascade reached the point that Harla's engineers called the threshold, the moment after which the reaction became self-sustaining and nothing could stop it. He knew this moment would come. It didn't make the moment easier to live through. He lived through it at 6:02. VCore didn't end with an explosion, not the way planets die in old human entertainment. No dramatic fireball, no satisfying detonation. The core gave way from the inside, and the planet broke apart within 43 minutes, the way things break apart when what holds them together stops working. First, the surface cracked, then the interior. The atmosphere dissipated. The oceans, what remained of them, fell into pieces. The pieces spread. Within 43 minutes, VTCore was gone, and debris field remained in orbit of the yellow star where the planet had existed for 4 billion years. Harla watched it for a long time. Then he stood up. He adjusted his uniform. He addressed his crew. Log completion time, he said. Prepare a full combat report for transmission to Earth Command and the Galactic Assembly. All logs, all records, no redactions. He paused. Every ship, ensure your crews have access to medical and psychological support. Starting now. We are going home. Now. He looked around the bridge. Sato, Fenn, the rest of you, who sat here and did what you were trained to do, you have served well. Every one of you. What we did today will not stay with us. It shouldn't stay. But we didn't start this, and we didn't have a choice that would have been without loss. Remember this. Nobody spoke. He sat down again. He began to write his report. His handwriting was very even. Ketwash's fleet arrived at the edge of the Votkor system 4 hours after the planet vanished. They exited fold space, expecting to find a star system. They found a star and a debris field, and 53 human warships standing in the space where the orbital grid had been. Dark, silent, not firing, not advancing, just waiting there. Ketwash stood by his porthole for a long time. His bridge crew was silent. There was nothing to say. The readings were clear. The composition of the debris field was clear. The timeline was clear. He had sent a strike on Kepler 7 to send a message, establish a border, demonstrate that the Bret Dominion was not to be trifled with. He had sent 212 ships against a station with 60 soldiers and a bakery, and humanity had responded by coming into the center of Bret civilization and destroying it in 31 minutes of battle and 6 hours of aftermath. He thought about the 8 words they had sent. You have 48 hours to evacuate your home world. He had laughed at those 8 words. He had sent back, come then. He looked at the debris field where Votkor had once been, where 200 years of his own life had been built, where his family had lived, where the oldest city of the Brets had stood since humanity discovered iron. He sat down. It was an undignified seat. It was the seat of a creature whose legs had stopped working beneath him. His communications officer said very quietly, Commander, the human fleet is hailing us. Put them on, he said. Harla's voice sounded not angry, not triumphant. It was the same voice that had broadcast to the civilians of Votkor, measured, weary, carrying the weight of what he was saying without hiding it. Commander Ketwash, I am transmitting the coordinates of your evacuation fleet. They are in the outer system. They are unharmed. We did not touch them. A pause. Go to your people. What you do next. Your decision. We will not pursue. The channel closed. Ketwash sat in silence. Then he said, Course to the outer system. His voice was something he didn't recognize. Take us to our people. The fleet turned away from the debris field and moved. The Galactic Assembly received the full combat report. Every log, every sensor file, every second of Reckoning's bridge recordings 12 hours after the disappearance of Votkor. The hall gathered for an emergency session. Every species was present. Ambassador Dean Saul hadn't slept. He had watched live feeds from the sensors of the Halvari observation posts throughout the battle. He had seen the grid fall in 31 minutes. He had seen the evacuation ships rising. He had seen the formation of the debris field. He hadn't slept for 31 hours, and he wasn't the only one. He stood at the podium and looked at the hall. 41 species. Some of them were thinking in the quiet way species think about things without saying them aloud how much further humanity could have been pushed. Some of them had disputes with human colonies. Some were watching the situation with the Brets and making calculations. Some were waiting to see what would happen. Now they knew. I prepared an official statement, he said. I have revised it 6 times and am satisfied that it is accurate and complete. He looked at his notes, then set them aside. I will say it simply. He looked at the hall. Do not attack the people of humanity. Do not attack their stations. Do not attack their ships, their colonies, their citizens, or their interests. He paused. They gave the Brets 48 hours. Then they gave them 6 more. He let that sink in. They are not impulsive. They are not aggressive. They did not expand into any space that wasn't free. They haven't started conflicts in their history that weren't started by someone else first. He looked at the hall one more time. But they finished them. Whatever they are, and I am no longer sure any of us understood what they are. They finish what is started against them, and they do not forget. He picked up his notes and stepped away from the podium. I have nothing else. The hall was quiet for a long time. Nobody else approached the podium. The rescue ship found Chen's pod 51 hours after it launched. It was a standard search and rescue vessel sent from the nearest human colony as soon as the emergency beacons were noted, and it found all 41 pods within a 10-hour window. Most of the people in them were alive. Some were not. All the children were alive. When the rescue ship's crew opened the hatch of Chen's pod, the first thing Chen did was check the count. 11 people went in. 11 people came out. He stood in the airlock of the rescue ship and confirmed it with his own eyes before he allowed himself to fully exhale. Darvangi was behind him. Her arm was now correctly bandaged. She had used the pod's small medical kit about 30 hours in, when the adrenaline finally left her and the pain found a place to exist. She exited the pod on her own feet. The rescue ship's doctor tried to sit them both down. Chen said no. They were given food, water, and blankets. And Chen ate his ration without tasting it. And the older girl from the school sat beside him and ate hers without saying a word. And that was okay. Some things didn't need words. The rescue ship officer came to give them a status report. She was careful with them. She explained what had been transmitted from Earth Command. Omega, Protocol Omega, the clash at VT Core. She used clear, direct language that people use when reporting news too big for softer words. When she finished, there was silence in the bay. Chen thought about Kepler 7, about the smell of bread in the mornings, about Commander Voss at the comms panel. Her voice was calm while the walls were crumbling. About the 60 soldiers and a station full of people who had done nothing but live at the edge of human space and call it home. He thought about a planet that no longer existed. He thought about how those two things lived in the same sentence. He didn't know what to call what he felt. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't grief, although grief was part of it. It was something heavier than both, something that didn't resolve into a feeling he could name and set aside. He thought about the 847 people, and Voss said, "This is a message, and it has been sent." He now understood she didn't just mean the emergency signal, not just the sensor data, she meant something more. She meant that the last thing she could do, the last thing any of them on Kepler 7 could do, was to ensure that what happened to them mattered, that it wasn't just an end, that it went somewhere. It went somewhere. The girl beside him finished her ration. She looked out the porthole at the stars outside. "What now?" she asked. Chen looked at the stars with her. "We're going home," he said. And then he thought about it honestly, about a galaxy that had just seen 53 ships disassemble a planetary defense grid in 30 minutes and destroy a world in 6 hours, and about one species sitting in the assembly hall with their notes put away, and nothing more to say about the debris field where a homeworld floated in orbit of a yellow star. About the fact that humanity didn't fire first, didn't expand into claimed space, didn't build the Omega fleet to conquer anything, built it quietly and patiently, hid it, kept it ready, and hoped with the peculiar hope of people who understood history that it would never be needed, and then used it fully, without hesitation, with exactly as much warning as they promised to give, and not a minute more. "Then we will continue," Chen said. "That's what we do. We continue." The girl thought about it. To her, that seemed enough. She leaned her head back, closed her eyes, and the stars continued to move past the porthole. Somewhere in the outer system of the yellow star, the fleet of Bret evacuation ships drifted in the cold and looked at the space where their world had been. 412 million survivors. The start of something that would take generations to become a civilization again. Somewhere in New Geneva, in a windowless room, Director Henrik Solberg read the final report. He read it in its entirety, every page. Then he sat with it for a long time in the silence of his office. Somewhere in deep space, on the bridge of the reckoning, Admiral Harla finished writing his report and closed the file. He didn't feel like a person who had won something. He felt like a person who had done the necessary thing, and who understood that necessary things are not always kind, and that bearing that difference is the price of the work he did. He would carry it, he always knew he would, sooner or later. He looked out the porthole at the stars. The galaxy was very quiet. It would remain quiet for a long time. Not because other species had nothing to say, but because they had seen something that morning that changed their understanding of a young race with round ships, fast fold drives, and bakeries at the edge of their space. They saw that humans were patient, that humans were restrained, that humans built, expanded, and negotiated, and kept their worst weapons hidden in the dark for years, hoping that day would never come. And they saw what happened when someone brought that day closer. The lesson was clear. It wasn't written in any treaty, not carved on any monument, not officially stated in any diplomatic message. It didn't need to be. It lived now in the memory of every species that watched. In the gap on the star charts, where a yellow star had 4 planets and now 3, in the cargo holds of 412 million survivors who managed to leave the world because humanity gave them 6 hours it wasn't obligated to give. The lesson was this: humanity wasn't the largest species in the galaxy, not the oldest, not the most advanced, not the most fearful before that day. But when you hurt their people, they came. They came from a moon no one had mapped, with ships no one had counted, with speed no one thought possible, with weapons no one knew about. They came, and they didn't stop. That was enough. That was more than enough. In the rescue ship, moving through the quiet darkness toward home, Private Marcus Chen sat, covered with a blanket with a girl sleeping beside him, and let the stars go by, and didn't think about what he had seen, because thinking about it would be later. It was always later, and for now, there was only movement, warmth, and the simple, good knowledge of being alive. Outside, The stars were the same stars as always. The galaxy breathed and learned to be careful.